As you'll get a recording, feel free to stretch your legs, grab a glass of water if you need to. This session is going to be super interactive. So if you do have any questions, then please shout them out. You'll be cool to interact throughout the session as well. If you want to put your microphone on and camera on, please do so. And yeah, speak out. This is obviously a chance to ask your burning questions to Prerna. So encourage you to do that. Okie dokie. Without further ado, I'm sure a lot of you know Prerna. I do recognize a few familiar friends here, but like I said, she is the VP or former VP of product management at Meetup and heading the design and product teams as they work to create better mobile and web experiences. Before this, she worked as VP of product at Coedition, an early stage e-commerce startup where she led the product design and data science and engineering teams. And prior to Coedition, she was director of product at Quartz, where she led product data science innovation team at Quartz Creative. So you guys really are in the best hands here when it comes to learning about customer discovery. So happy to have you here, Prerna, and I'll hand the stage to you.
Awesome. Great. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, first of all, hi everyone, and good morning, and afternoon, and evening, depending on wherever you are calling in from today. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for joining me on this live lesson that is something that I'm very passionate about talking about, which is customer discovery. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm like recovering from a cold right now, so if you hear this like very nasally tone, apologies, and we'll try to get through this.
Then I'm leaving.
I think there's someone on that's not on mute. If it, just make sure they're on mute unless they want to ask a question. By all means, then go on off mute. We'll have some time at the end also for Q&A. So if you don't want to put your questions in the chat, feel free to ask them at the end. All right, let's get started. So before we actually dive into today's lesson, I wanted to share a little bit about myself. Madeline gave a really wonderful introduction about my career, but I want to talk to you about something that's not on my resume and talk a little bit about how I got interested in customer discovery. And I like to joke that actually that story really started when I was 10 years old. And I remember when I was a kid, I was obsessed with making the perfect cup of Indian chai. For those of you who are familiar with it, but it's basically Indian tea for my friends and family. And loved drinking tea, loved making it, but it always seemed to be kind of a hit or miss affair. Sometimes I get the proportions wrong and like never quite sort of figured it out. So one afternoon, after school, my friends came over for what I called the ultimate chai challenge. And I brewed up like 5 different versions of my chai, different proportions of ingredients, and I had all my friends do a blind taste test and fill out a survey with like the version that they liked the best. And that feedback really helped me figure out what was the right combination of tea and water and milk and ginger and all the other spices I was putting in. And it turns out that that feedback was so critical because that actually ended up being my recipe that I still use today. I share this story because it really kind of reinforces a lesson that I learned very, very young. It wasn't, the tea and everything, it wasn't about what I liked, but it was about what my friends liked in their cup and what they wanted. And that really sort of changed everything for me and how I thought about um, putting out products into the world. I've brought that customer research and discovery mindset and skill set to each of my roles in product to really unlock powerful insights that drive meaningful experiences and drive business growth, whether it was scaling a business 20x while I was at Coedition, or helping navigate the challenges of building an in-person business at Meetup during COVID. Um, and all of those hard moments, I would say, I've really relied on that one constant, which is focusing on user needs. And that's really where the genesis of today's kind of lesson centers around, and what the 6-week course that I've been building with Gigantic is really centered around. So I'm excited to share some of those insights with you today. So for today, what I thought we could spend some time on is actually talk about what customer discovery is, why we do it, and again, what my take is on the different kinds of customer discovery you can perform. And I want to keep this fun and interactive. There's going to be a few moments that I'll ask you to jot your answers down, put them in the chat, and we'll make it fun and engaging that way. And like I said at the top, if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to drop those in the chat as well. And again, we'll take questions at the end. So, all right, let's actually start with one of these interactive sessions and interactive components. So, I like to have everyone put in a guess in the chat for what they think all of these products that you see on the screen have in common. And let's give everyone like maybe 30 seconds to put in their best guess. Okay, Claudia says they're all physical products. Yeah. Other guesses? Jordan says not driven by customer needs first. Okay, Jordan, let's hope that you haven't come to this before. You know the answer. No longer exist. Okay. Any final guesses? You have some good ones. Okay. So almost, I think Jordan had probably the closest answer, and Mighty is. But yes, they all failed. And the reason they failed is because they didn't go deep into understanding what their customers needed. Or in the case of like that new Coke picture that you saw, they didn't really, they underestimated sort of the emotional connection that customers had to the existing product, and didn't really realize that by introducing a new product, what could go wrong. And for anyone that knows the story of New Coke, customers were so mad about that new formula that they actually filed lawsuits against the company for changing its iconic drink. So the fact of the matter is that there could be real repercussions, both like from a business and product perspective, if you aren't able to really understand like what your customers are looking for. So, why, like I kind of talked about why that mattered, but one other thing I would just want to mention is that, it's easy to talk about the big brands, right? Everything that you saw was a big brand. Juicero, those of you remember it, Segway. But it's not just big brands that fail, right? According to this Harvard Business study, every year about 30,000 new products are introduced, and about 95% of them fail, which is a really crazy failure rate when you think about it. And truth be told, we talk about this in the abstract, but I'm sure there's like a lot of personal stories here of many of us having experienced some kind of failure in our product careers. I know I certainly have on more than one occasion. So what do we do? Like, are we just all destined to be total failures? And the thing is, I'm glad you're all here, because other people might be destined for that fate, but you are not. You're here, and you're going to learn about how customer discovery can really help you make sure that you're really thinking about your customers and keeping them at the center of your process, such that you reduce that risk of failing. So let's talk about customer discovery. I like to describe it as the scientific method meeting social psychology. And when you perform customer discovery correctly, it's both a methodology and it's a mindset. that focuses on understanding the needs, the desires, and frustrations of your target customer base, and then figuring out what the best way to solve them is. And this is just really critical to making sure that we're not building something that nobody wants, or worse, building something that we think people want based on our own biases. So where customer discovery really thrives is by, taking the bias out of the question and really ultimately allowing us to build products and businesses that are successful. Now, the question is, how do we actually conduct customer discovery? So I want everyone to take about 30 seconds and jot down in the chat up to 3 words what they think customer discovery is. Okay, listening to their needs, learning from the customer, being curious. I love that, Tony. Insights, pain points. Yep, trying to figure out their workflow. Okay. All really great answers. And I think what most people think of when they think of customer discovery is thinking about it from this like very specific lens of, I need to come up with a list of questions, I need to find the right people to talk to, and I need to ask them these questions to figure out what those pain points are. And while that is one way to conduct customer discovery, I want to expand that worldview and talk a little bit more about, the different ways that you can actually conduct customer research. So from my years of doing customer discovery and research with my teams, I've come to the conclusion that there are so many sources of information that we can use to learn and understand our customer better, but are actually often really overlooked. Some of these sources of information we need to actually go to our customer to get. And some sources of data we might actually have available to us because our customers are just engaging with our products and giving us real-time information. And where I really want us to spend some time thinking about, and in that 6-week course I'm working on developing, this is where we spend a lot of time figuring out is actually what sources of data do you have available to you today? And how can you take all those different sources of data to really figure out what the source of truth is and create a compelling narrative of what our customers need? So this is where we're going to really get into kind of outlining what the different types of customer feedback are. So when you think about, like I said, customer discovery, oftentimes people think about the interviews and the surveys. That kind of feedback is what I like to call direct type of customer feedback. It's super useful. But really there is an opportunity to go beyond that. And I'll talk about not just direct feedback, but talk about these 3 other types of feedback called indirect, inferred, and intervention. And again, like I said, as you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll either answer them along the way or we can save them towards the end. So let's start with direct, because that's the one I think people are most familiar with. And what they most often associate customer discovery with. Direct feedback is what your customers say to you directly when you prompt them. This can take lots of different forms, but like I said, most popular examples of direct feedback come in the form of surveys, NPS scores, in-app ratings, or even some kind of like contextual interview that you might conduct with the customer, either moderated or unmoderated. There's tons of pros to doing this kind of research. Like I said, very popular method. And the biggest pro is that you're hearing from the customer herself. The other benefit is that you can actually get some really targeted and relevant information. And you don't have to go on this like hunting expedition for information because you're asking the questions that you need answers to. When I was at Coedition, we were building a marketplace for plus size women's fashion. We actually went to our customers' homes. We went to New York, Chicago, a couple other locations where we knew our shopper like kind of lived to understand how she shopped and learn more about her preferences. And that really gave us a super deep understanding of how and when she likes to shop. And that directly influenced the kinds of products and shopping experience that we built for her on our site. Now, for the downsides of this particular customer feedback method, it can be costly to set up. The overhead admin can take up a lot of time, especially if you're bringing in people to talk to. In our case, we had to spend money to like actually fly to these different locations and go into customers' homes. And so that it's not a cost-effective method if you think about it from that perspective. You have to figure out who to talk to, you have to figure out how to reach them, schedule them, talk to them. For things like surveys, there's lots of tools out there that do make it pretty easy, but still, like I said, the overhead costs can become pretty expensive. There's also the issue of fatigue, right? Your customer's time is really precious resource, and you can easily cross into survey fatigue, or just if you're prompting them too many times, asking them to answer questions so many times, they may not want to engage in those customer research studies. And then lastly, I've seen this often is that sometimes what kind of response you get from your customer can be a little biased because it's taken out of context. So a good example of this is like you might ask someone how they might act in a situation, or you might ask them how they might have acted in the past. And when a customer responds, they might, again, they aren't living in the moment. You aren't observing them doing the act in the moment. You're asking them to do some recall, and that can introduce biases, as opposed to, again, observing them when they're actually doing something while they're doing a specific task or objective. So it's this customer feedback method of direct feedback is a super powerful tool to keep in your customer discovery toolkit. It's not always the easiest to implement or make sense of. So I want to move on to other methods that you can use that are a little bit more cost effective, but still give you some really powerful insights. The next bucket that I want to talk about is what I like to call indirect feedback. This is what people or customers say about you unprompted. So think of this as website reviews, social media comments, discussion forums on Reddit, or even internal sources that you might get like customer support tickets or bug reports. All of these are amazing sources of information of your customers who are engaging with your product, but you didn't ask them for that feedback. They gave that voluntarily. At Meetup, this was a really powerful source of information for us because it turns out we had a very passionate user base of organizers who are using our platform to organize their communities. In fact, when I arrived, I found out about this group of organizers who created their own discussion board outside of Meetup called Discuss Meetup, to talk about issues that they were having and how to use the platform and how to hack it for their needs. In fact, it's still live today. So like, I think it's like 15 years going strong and people are still using that forum to ask about our product. But my team and I would often scour these forums for insights because of how valuable the unfiltered feedback was in almost real time. If you don't have something like this, consider setting up a community for your users because there's so much you can learn from your users engaging with other users and other members. So the pros of this feedback methodology is that unlike direct feedback, truth be told, it really doesn't cost any time to set up, especially if some of the sources are external, like social media reviews or external review sites like Google or Trustpilot. Of course, if you do decide to set up your community on Slack or Discord, like I've done so in the past, there might be some overhead, but generally speaking, a lot of those can be kind of just self-managed. This is also a really great method to overcome the cold start problem. So let's say you don't have a product or you don't really have customers. You might be wondering, where do I get started with customer feedback? The nice thing about indirect feedback is that a lot of that information can be accessed publicly. You can look up what people are saying about not just you, but maybe your competitors or established businesses in the space. And it can allow you to gauge maybe the white space that exists for a new product to enter the market without having to deeply invest in collecting real customer data. So it's a really easy place to get started for early product validation. Now the cons, similar to direct feedback, it can be biased. Sometimes the vocal minority is the one that speaks the loudest. In a Facebook group with meetup organizers, I have like maybe 1,000 organizers. I think there were probably like a select few that would be constantly posting, and often that feedback would be incredibly negative. So, I wouldn't base all of my decisions off of, that vocal minority, but to really understand if that sentiment was actually shared amongst a larger organizer population. And sometimes I found that that feedback was extremely localized to a very specific use case and a very specific set of users and generally didn't apply. But there were times that I did also see like, okay, there's a couple people talking about this one particular issue that would impact, a wider user base. And in those cases, it was very, very helpful. The other challenge with indirect is that what I like to think of it as kind of like the extensibility of that feedback. So what I mean by that is you might actually hear about what's wrong with the product today, but it's less it's hard to kind of understand what your customers might need from you tomorrow or in the future. And as opposed to direct feedback where you can actually ask users about the merits of a future idea, you don't really get a chance to ask that here, right? Because people are just telling this to you without it being prompted. So you have to tread carefully a little bit and make sure that you're considering the feedback in the context of which it's being given, and perhaps actually pull in other research methods to support your analysis and your insights. The third bucket of customer feedback is what I like to call inferred. This is pretty straightforward. It's actually any information you can derive from the data that you might already be collecting about your customer as they're using your product. So things like event clickstream data, transaction data, purchase history, these can all help us understand the behaviors of what people are or are not doing when they're interacting with your product and how they may or may not be converting. This is a really powerful tool, especially when you're at the early stages of customer discovery. At Coedition, we established a pattern of consistently looking at our clickstream data that we built into kind of a funnel. We built into our funnel and had corresponding metrics. And that allowed us to uncover a pretty substantial checkout problem that we had. One of the downsides of this collection method is that it rarely tells you why something is happening. And that's what happened at Coedition, right? We knew we had a really high abandoned cart rate, but it took a combination of some other methods to really understand the why behind what was going on. So don't underestimate the power of looking at your data and using it to either identify problems or gut check something that you might think is a problem. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about probably one of my favorite types of customer feedback, which is what I like to call the intervention method. This is information you can collect by staging an intervention right at the point in time when the customer is experiencing some kind of friction in your product. So I'd love to share my co-edition example again. We knew we had a high cart abandon problem, but we didn't know why. So I staged my intervention. If a customer dropped in the middle of checkout, I sent her an email from my email account. We had no fancy abandoned cart email. And I asked her why she dropped and if there was anything I could do to help her make that purchase. And to my complete surprise, I got several responses back to that email, and all of them pointed to operational issues like we didn't have clear shipping times on that checkout. And we didn't have expedited shipping options. All of those became our top company priorities and helped us increase conversion by 20%. So if you're trying to figure out why something is happening, this is an excellent method because it really helps you get to where that person is experiencing the friction in your product and your product experience. And sometimes in this really scrappy way, be able to get that information very quickly and make better decisions. So all of this to say, as you engage on your customer discovery journey with your product, the one thing I want you to leave with is know that there's no one right method. But I hope today opened the doors for you to kind of consider different opportunities and different methods to conduct discovery with your customers and really just get creative with how you can improve your understanding of them. So if you're eager to learn more, I think Madeline dropped the link to the customer research and discovery course, but feel free to visit that site and learn a little bit more. Basically, we'll go into detail of each of these methods with lots of examples, case studies, and over the course of the 6 weeks, you get to actually develop your own customer discovery project and really get to use these methods in real time. So lots of really great information. But for today, I'm happy to take any questions at this point. If there's anything burning that's on top of mind for you, happy to do that now. And I'll actually stop my screen share so I can see people's faces.
Thank you so much, Prerna. I will also jump on your promo for your course at Gigantic and say, if you wanted to take it on demand, we have that option as well, where you just get access to the 10+ hours of video lessons, assignments, resources, customer discovery project. You could do that in your own time, or if you wanted to do async on demand plus private mentor sessions, if you got a specific problem that you want to solve, we offer that as well. So get in touch. Are there any questions that anyone has? Maybe something that you're coming up against at work, some pain points that you're sort of noticing? If there are no questions, we could wrap it up early. Oh yes, Jordan.
Can come off mute. I thought about typing into the chat, but it's probably just easier to speak it into existence, so I'll go that way. I think something that I'm struggling with internally with my stakeholders as we move closer towards doing more customer discovery work is when we've tried to learn in the past, our biggest observation and learning is our customers don't know what they want. And it's been difficult to like narrow it in or hone in on observable, repeatable, actionable rationale behind some of their activities or behaviors. I think our sample size is a little bit low. I think that's likely untrue. We just haven't uncovered it the right way. But given that kind of circumstance, how might you think about reframing our approach towards performing customer discovery to learn a little bit different insights?
Yeah. Can you give me a little bit more context on kind of what product you're building and who you've identified your customer to be?
Sure. So similar to the Gigantic offering, it would be a training coaching product for scale up founders that are probably more operational experts. and we're teaching them how to work on their business. So it's the E-Myth, if you're familiar with that. It's just our spin or our variation and version of how to teach leaders how to work on their business. And the most discernible thing that we've been able to learn from it, from any kind of interviews that we've done so far, is it's still a very trust-based sale or choice. People aren't necessarily sure what their triggers are when they get to the point where they're ready to, but they're getting recommendations, getting referrals, getting input from people that they trust, be it other leaders, be it people in peer groups, be it their accountant or lawyer. But by way of triggers before, knowing that they need this type of activity for it, or what happens in their life, or rationale for why they're going to choose today to be the day or not to be the day, it feels fairly sporadic or random is what we've observed.
Yeah. And what's your kind of current hypothesis right now that you've been basing your product decisions off of?
On what is like the hypothesis behind why a customer would choose to want this or not to want this?
Yeah, or I guess like what is the thing that you are trying to learn right now?
I am trying to learn what are the predecessor occurrences that someone is feeling, the emotions or the pain that they're feeling in their business that makes them trigger an activity to go out and find or explore professional services and helping them to scale their business.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And so what it sounds like, if I heard you correctly, is that you've done some customer discovery right now and you haven't been able to identify like a single pattern or an insight into really being able to identify what those triggers are.
Yeah, it feels different for every individual, very personalized, and maybe that's because we're looking at it too narrowly, and or I do think our sample size is still a little bit low. And the other
Yeah.
thing that just I'm fighting internally then too is just the belief then that it is very personal, so it needs to be very personalized, and we can't make any kind of supporting but constraining beliefs and assumptions to test against them.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna, without knowing more of the details, I'm
Oh.
certainly gonna spend all day like, trying to triage and diagnose this. I think, the couple of things that you did mention are probably like also probably similar flags for me, is that one is just thinking about sort of your user persona and who you're kind of going after. Founders might actually be like a very broad thing. There's lots of different kinds of founders out there too. And so kind of how you're thinking about your customer segmentation really matters. This is a whole topic that we get into the course of like being able to identify your persona and create clear use cases for it. So that might be an opportunity for you, Jordan, to kind of just go back and say, okay, not all founders are created equal. Maybe there's some dissection by like industry or by like, are they I don't know, a B2B or a SaaS or a B2C type organization. It could also be the founder's background, maybe like, right? Like it's people who come from non-technical backgrounds might be more interested, or maybe actually people who do come from technical backgrounds are more likely to want to take on this training. So I would say your customer segmentation is probably where I'd start. And then, yeah, probably the sample size and making sure that you've got enough people to sort of talk to before I would say, yeah, like I don't know if I would blame it's a very personal thing. I think you could still probably get to some insights before the conclusion is like, well, we can't really serve it because it's so personalized.
Love it. Appreciate it.
Okay. There was a question in the chat about talking about when to do customer discovery. And I think this is such a great question. I think a lot of people like to think of it as, oh, I'm about to start a new project, or I'm about to kick off a new feature and I should do customer discovery. And while it is very valid to do so, the thing that I love to stress to my teams and to teams that I've kind of worked with and consulted with is that frankly, you should be doing customer discovery all the time. And that when you make customer discovery a habit, you are really strengthening the value of that feedback and therefore strengthening the value of your product. So what I mean by like doing it all the time is that, one of the things that I had done at Meetup was we actually institutionalized it as a practice. Every Thursday we had customer calls set up already, and we had 3 or 4 people that we would line up, and it didn't even matter, right? Like what if a PM on my team actually wanted to get answers to a certain feature, they could use those sessions for that. So it's kind of like a free for all for my product team to, use that time to get feedback. But I guess my point is that if you're especially a product leader, or even a product manager, making it like part of your daily or weekly or even monthly practice is where you're really where I find that a lot more teams have success in making sure that it's that the things that they're developing are actually going in the right direction.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I was worried you were going to say that though. But I think it makes sense. I think it's about convincing the rest of the organization to actually make it, or even your own team, to make it a practice, because that's really what we need to do. Thank you. That was very
Of
helpful.
course. I know it's like I think it takes time, and it's hard sometimes to see the value of it. I totally recognize that. The one thing we had done at Coedition, again, we were a small team, is I actually it was a little bit easier to get buy-in, but I like forced essentially the entire like exec team all the way down to people who were like on our merchandising team to pick up a customer support shift. And that was like eye-opening, honestly, just to even have to like answer customer support emails and phone calls, because you just have to like you end up you're not so removed from those customer pain points. So there's other ways to do that too. Is Mady, sorry, I'm saying your name wrong. But I'm hoping that like is another area where it's not like you have to go do customer research. You can literally use stuff that's happening internally already and just say, hey, like product team, everyone's expected to like be on the customer support schedule for like 1 hour a week or 1 hour a month. I think Jeffrey has a question.
Yes,
Jeffrey,
hi.
Yeah, hi.
So my question, and thank you for doing this presentation. So my question has to do with specifically when you are kind of trying to solve for a problem area that there are other existing solutions. Well, not solutions, but like proposed solutions too, right? It's like if you're doing research, how does that look like from a customer discovery standpoint? Like suppose, yes, you're doing research in a field like say the career market, right? We already have a number of different career solutions for that. How would you exactly conduct research in a way that allows you to create a niche offering or a targeted offering that's not necessarily the same as what's already out there?
Yeah, good question. I think to me, where I would start with is developing sort of like certain hypotheses of like where you think the white space in their career market is today. And certainly, one of some of the stuff I talked about where you could look at like, what are people saying about your, competitors or current people, kind of current players in that space? Is there a market that they're not able to serve, or people like, not just market, but like maybe the service isn't that great. Maybe, that there's a value proposition offering that you can do it more cheaply, you can do it faster, you can do it in less time and with less time and cheaply, right? And start to develop your hypothesis around that. And then once you have your hypothesis and probably like a persona, then go and actually find those people, out in the wild, run surveys and, probably do some user research. Those are really, again, I don't know what kind of career service you're thinking about, but that might be something that might be good to actually even observe in the wild, right? Like shadow a courier. Maybe there's some insights from the courier side, right? That
Right.
would be interesting to kind of like pick up. Maybe there's inefficiencies in the way that packages are being delivered
Oh,
that,
no, sorry, not courier, like career,
oh,
like
courier, sorry, I heard,
jobs and yeah.
I'm so sorry. It's also my cold and I think I hear like
No, that's fine.
differently. Anyways, I'm sure that the same advice
Yeah.
stands. Again, if it's career side, then
Mhm.
thinking about yeah, some of those same sort of pain points and creating a plan around that. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
And then I see in the chat, Denise had a question around recommendations to move to a continuous discovery practice. Denise, if you're around, I'd love to hear a little bit about like any current sort of challenges that you faced in or perceived or future anticipated challenges.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it's mostly a follow-up to I think it was Mady. I'm not sure if I said her name correctly. So I guess I'm a relatively new PM, and I will admit to my current method for discovery is I know there's a thing on the roadmap coming up. I need to start defining what exactly that is, what it's going to look like, the problem it's intended to solve. But I've also heard and read that the best way to identify problems before you have a roadmap item is to do continuous discovery. I know Teresa Torres preaches that as well. So I guess coming from a kind of novice PM, how could I personally and potentially with my team establish a framework or a repeatable practice where we're doing this regularly, maybe as like baby steps with the ultimate goal of we as a team do this continuously, and theoretically it improves how we go about road mapping things that actually deliver value.
I think the key for you here, this is such a great question, and I'm really happy that you asked it. So I think the biggest thing is, and the thing that you said was like, well, I'm doing discovery for things that are already on the roadmap. And I think that the way to flip that is, well, how can I get things on the roadmap that I already did discovery for and know that that is actually a real value, right? And that's really kind of like the mindset shift is how could you come to roadmap planning, and maybe this happens on a quarterly basis for you, it did for us. So how could I come to quarterly roadmap planning with a list of things that I already know I've validated as a customer problem, know what the potential business impact is, and have, some idea of what a good solution or feature could look like. So that you're not doing discovery once like the project kicks off or once it's on the roadmap, but you get it approved because you had all of that information going into it. I know that is like sometimes it's really crazy. And that in itself is a whole mindset shift and a practice that you have to build like any muscle. So I just start with like one user research session maybe that you do at the start of a quarter, mid-quarter, in anticipation for planning the next quarter or the next whatever, the next cycle of planning that you have as a team. And that might be something that you can even, we can talk a little bit more. I'm happy to answer more questions on this, but ways that you can kind of codify that for your team, or you're like, hey team, like I did this user research, here's what I heard from our customers, and here's like 3 or 4 features that I think we could develop, here's what the potential impact is, and you do that like maybe a few weeks before roadmap planning is going to come, so you can start to sort of socialize that with your product leadership, with other PMs, what have you. And that's kind of like your entry point into thinking about your projects that are upcoming differently because you've already researched them and not the other way around.
Okay, that sounds pretty doable,
helpful?
pretty actionable. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
So cool. Thank you so much, Prerna, and thank you everybody for your questions. I know we're a couple of minutes over, but if you did have any other questions that you wanted me to pass on to Prerna, email them to me. And if you had any questions about the course, the different formats, then email them to me as well. We'd be happy to chat to you about how we could help you and how we could help you get to your goals of doing great customer discovery. So once again, thanks so much, Prerna. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to share.
No, this is great. Thank you for your questions, and I hope this was helpful. And yeah, of course, reach out to Madeline, and I'm happy to chat too with anybody who is looking for more insight.
Awesome. We're going to share a recording around later today of this session, but we will see you all very soon. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Prerna.